Can you imagine living in a place where every detail of your life is decided by rules that cannot be questioned? From the clothes you wear to how you behave inside and outside the home? For Amish women, this is reality. But what sustains so many rules? And what is their daily life like in such a rigid system? Today, Bello Mundo is going to show you how these women live, the challenges they face, and what happens when a simple mistake can have serious consequences. You've heard of the Amish, right? That religious group that seems to live in another time. No cars, no electricity, no cell phones. It's hard to imagine how that works nowadays, isn't it? These communities emerged in Europe in the 17th century as part of a religious movement that wanted to get away from everything they considered excessive or worldly. In the 18th century, many migrated to the United States, where they remain steadfast to this day, living practically untouched by modernity. If you've already watched our video on the 18 curiosities of the Amish, you'll remember that we talked about their history and traditions. But if you haven't, it's worth checking it out after this video. Today's topic is different. We're going to understand what life is like for Amish women, what rules they follow, and what happens when these rules aren't followed. And to begin with, there's nothing better than talking about one of the most visible rules: clothing. Number 1. Clothes. And when we say rules, it's no exaggeration. Absolutely everything about clothing is controlled. There is no room for personal choice or taste. The colors? Forget vibrant tones or prints. Just black, navy blue, brown, or, at most, a dark green. Synthetic fabrics like polyester or nylon. Prohibited. Only natural fabrics are allowed: cotton, wool, and linen. Even the length of skirts is decided by rules. Always long, covering the ankles, and accompanied by sleeves that don't leave the arms showing. Over the dress, the women wear black or white aprons, depending on the occasion or their age. As for the shoes, simple to the extreme, without heels or any kind of modern design. Don't even think about anything that goes beyond the basics. Functionality is the only priority. The most striking thing? Nothing can be decorative. No embellishments, frills, or any attention-grabbing details. Everything is designed to avoid any trace of individuality or vanity. Number 2. Buttons and zippers. When we talk about embellishments on clothes, we're not talking about flashy accessories like scarves, sunglasses, or brooches. Here, even buttons and zippers are left out. That's right. For the women of these communities, buttons are considered too sophisticated. Instead, dresses are fastened with pins, hooks, or eyelets. It may seem like a small detail, but this choice is far from coincidental. They are seen as symbols of ostentation, something that doesn't match the values of simplicity and modesty that govern their lives. And if you thought that was strange, zippers go even further. They practically don't exist in clothing. Press studs and pins have taken their place because they are simpler and less mechanical. The reason for this? It's linked to the concept of Gelassenheit, a philosophy of humility and submission that guides the entire community. For them, the practicality and modernity of zippers are incompatible with their principles. And just to make things even more interesting, among Amish women, the absence of underwear is something that also attracts attention. Number 3. Underwear. It's not that they don't wear underwear, but their choices are quite different from what we're used to. Instead of modern, practical garments, many women wear bloomers, long knickers that can reach down to the knee or even the ankles. Made at home, usually from cotton, these garments have a dual function: to ensure modesty and to protect against the cold, especially when working outdoors. Now, Here's a curious fact. In some communities, elastic bands are forbidden. That's right. So, to close their garments, they use clasps. And forget anything decorative, like colors, bows, and lace. Everything needs to be simple to the extreme. You know those dreaded beige panties. That's right. That's more or less the intention. In less conservative groups, women can even buy underwear in stores, but no thongs or modern pieces. They are always basic, full coverage panties, usually in neutral colors and fabrics such as cotton. In stricter communities, the story gets even more unusual. They can't even wear bras. And it was precisely this rule that caught the attention of Lizzie Eanes, a former member who fled this reality at the age of 19. Today, she is a digital influencer and shares shocking stories about her former life on various social networks. Number 4. Head coverings. Among the most striking elements of the female look is the cap, that white cap that women start wearing from the age of 13. Simple and discreet, it is not just an accessory but a rule that follows deep-rooted traditions and religious interpretations. These coverings have well-defined functions. The black cap is reserved for unmarried women in religious services, while the white cap is worn in everyday life at any age. This practice comes from a biblical teaching, more specifically from Corinthians chapter 11, verse 6, which reinforces the importance of women covering their heads. And here's a curious detail. The shape of the cap changes according to the community. For example, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, home to one of the largest concentrations of these groups in the United States, it has a heart shape. Number 5. Hair. And while we're on the subject of rules for the head, let's also talk about hair. For the women of these communities, cutting their hair is out of the question. According to biblical tradition, long hair is considered the glory of women and should be preserved as a gift from God. Cutting them would be an act of defiance of the rules and is therefore strictly forbidden. But don't think that women can leave their hair loose. Even long hair must always be tied up in buns or braids and covered when leaving the house. But as it turns out, it's not just the hair that's left untouched. Remember Lizzie Eanes, the member of those communities we mentioned earlier? Well, in one of her videos, she revealed other impressive restrictions. According to her, the women in her community were not allowed to shave their armpits or legs, or even use deodorant. This, according to the rules, would be considered vain, and therefore a violation of what was expected of them. Number 6. Limited education and submission. Now, let's talk about education, or rather, the lack of it. Girls in these communities only attend school up to the 8th grade. That's it. And the focus is not exactly on preparing them for the modern world, but on teaching them the basics: reading, writing, mathematics, and, of course, a lot of Christian doctrine. After that, they start training for what will be their future, looking after the home, raising children, and serving the community. But it goes beyond that. From an early age, they learn that submission is not optional, it is expected. The husband is the central figure in the house, and it's up to the women to follow his decisions and opinions. All this is seen as essential to maintain order and avoid conflicts. After all, with everyone in their own role, there isn't much room for argument, is there? Now, if you think that this dynamic only starts after the wedding, you're wrong. Some communities teach this as early as dating. This is where the famous bundling or Amish bedroom ritual comes in. And calm down. It has nothing to do with intimacy. It goes without saying that premarital sex is strictly forbidden by the rules, right? In this bedroom ritual, the couple spends the night together in the same bed, but fully clothed. And to ensure that nothing gets out of hand, a wooden board is often placed between the two. Sounds strange? Then you should know that, for the more conservative groups, this tradition is still considered essential in the dating process because it's from here that the man begins to command and the woman learns to obey. Number 7. Preparing for marriage. And since we've talked about the rules for women during the courtship period, let's move on to the next step: marriage. And of course, it's also full of traditions and rules that are very different from what we're used to. It all starts with the proposal. The man proposes marriage, but unlike what we see out there, no rings or jewelry. That's considered too vain. Instead, he presents the bride with something simpler, like a piece of porcelain. Now, if buttons are already forbidden, you can imagine that jewelry is also out of the question, right? And the simplicity doesn't stop there. During the preparations, the bride makes her own dress, following very specific rules. And here comes a curiosity. No white. This color, seen as a symbol of vanity, has no place in the weddings of these communities. Instead, brides wear shades of blue or indigo. Blue symbolizes purity, fidelity, and loyalty, while indigo is associated with heaven and eternity. These colors have a deep meaning, representing a woman's commitment to her future husband and to the community. And don't expect flashy dresses. They follow the pattern, simple, without embellishments, and made from fabrics that will be reused. In fact, in many cases, the same dress worn at the wedding becomes the bride's worship clothes, and in the future, even her shroud when she passes away. Oh, and there's one more curious detail. Before the wedding, the bride has to prepare a meal for the groom, and this is part of a tradition full of very specific rules, which begin as soon as the engagement is announced. In the community, it is the bride's parents who are responsible for making the official announcement. This happens during the service, which takes place every 2 weeks, usually in the members' homes. On that day, they not only announce the engagement, but also the date and time of the wedding, inviting the whole community to the ceremony. But here's something unexpected. On the Sunday that the announcement is made, the bride and groom don't show up for church. Meanwhile, the bride is busy at home, preparing dinner for the groom. They dine alone, and when the bride's family returns from the service, it is she who formally introduces the groom to her parents. A simple tradition, but full of symbolism. After the announcement, time is short. The bride helps her mother organize the wedding and the party, which will take place at her parents' house. It's all very practical and quick. After all, simplicity is one of the hallmarks of these communities, and you can forget any idea of time off after the big day. The first night of the wedding is spent at the bride's house, and the next day she has to get up early to clean up. No rest for them. What about the honeymoon? Well, don't expect exotic trips or long vacations. The couple spend the winter months visiting their new relatives, especially at weekends. During these visits, they receive most of the wedding gifts, useful items such as crockery, pots and pans, canned food, tools, and household utensils. Until they can set up their own home, the couple continue to live with the bride's parents, usually until the following spring. That's when they finally start life in their own home. Number 8. Life at home. The home is the center of the universe for the women of these communities, and the responsibilities they take on go far beyond what we imagine. Not only do they cook, clean, and sew, challenging tasks in themselves, but they also manage food stocks, prepare preserves, and look after the animals. And when necessary, they still work in the fields alongside their husbands and children, planting and harvesting. On the other hand, working outside the home is not common for them. In some cases, they can work in specific jobs, such as midwife or teacher, but only if the men in the family, whether fathers or husbands, allow it. This permission is not always guaranteed, as working outside the home is seen as something that can distract women from their domestic obligations. One curiosity is that the food they prepare, such as homemade bread, preserves, and pies, is highly valued even outside the community. In some regions, they engage in small businesses, selling their handmade products to tourists and local markets. Despite appearing isolated, these women have a significant economic influence. Their efforts are essential to supporting the family, even if they are rarely formally recognized for it. Number 9. Restrictions and rules. Being a woman in these communities means living under a set of restrictions that sounds unthinkable to the rest of the world. No driving cars, using technology, or even participating in important community decisions. Everything is controlled, and the boundaries are very clear. Inside the home, they can have their say, but it's the husband who has the final say. He is seen as the spiritual and practical leader of the family, and submission is non-negotiable. It's a rule that permeates all interactions. And the challenges don't stop there. Access to modern healthcare is another sticking point. Although some communities accept basic treatments, many women give birth at home with little or no medical assistance. Diseases and complications are treated with home remedies, which increases the risks, especially during pregnancy and childbirth. And what about having children? For them, this is not a choice. Contraceptive methods are out of the question. The interpretation of the biblical commandment to be fruitful and multiply is taken literally. This means that families with many children are the norm, and women face enormous social and religious pressure to fulfill this role. From control over their bodies to decisions within the home, these rules shape everything. For them, living outside these expectations is simply not an option. And now the big question arises: what if the rules are broken? Number 10. Consequences. If a woman decides to break the rules in such a closed community, the reaction is anything but mild. First, she may be publicly reprimanded by the leaders, often during a service in front of everyone. But if that's not enough, things get more serious. The next step is shunning, a practice that can be described as total social isolation. No one talks to her, no one shares a meal, no one even recognizes her. In a life that revolves around the collective, this kind of exclusion is like erasing someone from existence. Everything she has, from friendships to emotional support, simply disappears. At home, the situation doesn't improve either. Her husband, as absolute boss, can intensify the rules, and even the children can be encouraged to cut off contact, treating her like a stranger. Even if she tries to make amends, being accepted again is a long and often impossible process. In some cases, the worst can happen: expulsion. For someone who has grown up in a bubble where the outside world is almost a myth, facing this reality alone is like falling into an endless abyss. That's why, for the women in these communities, following the rules isn't just a matter of faith. It's a matter of survival, even if it means giving up their own desires. What impressed you most about the lives of these women? Share it in the comments and let's discuss this fascinating reality further. If you enjoy exploring curiosities like this, stay tuned for more incredible stories from our bello mundo. For those of you who have watched this far, thank you very much and see you on your next adventure.